Here is an example. This is Beethoven's first movement of his Fifth Symphony. And that's the very beginning, very beginning. Ta-da-da-dum, ta-da-da-dum. Now, this is going to surprise you, but on the second scale, you will see what I call a motif form. And then next to it is a repetition of the same motif form, but a little bit further down. That motif form is made of an interval of 3 notes, from the G to the E, G, F, E. That's 3 notes, and in music we call that a third. This entire first movement is built with just this one motif form, this interval of 3 notes. Dun, 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 dun. Just those 2 notes defining an interval build an entire piece of music. And you will find this in any kind of music whatsoever, from any tradition whatsoever, even so-called avant-garde music, even surrealist music, and so on. You will find at the very beginning of the work a group constellation of signifiers from which arise the entire work. So we can see that with a semantic approach, we can answer a question which Schoenberg never asked. What made those motif forms, how did those motif forms end up building such a large work? Well, my answer is very simple: condensation and displacement, or metonymy and metaphor. And that's one application of a semantic approach to music. Another application, we need to go back to Lacan for a very short time. This is what is called a Borromean knot. It has been in existence since the 13th century and been used to represent Christian Trinity. The characteristic of a knot is that 1, it is made of 3 circles, and 2, those 3 circles are intertwined in such a way that if you cut just one circle, any of those 3 circles, if you cut just one, all the circles actually fall through. They are free from one another. So 3 intertwined circles, just cut one of them, and the whole edifice falls apart. Out of that notion, Lacan constructed another notion called RSI, for real, symbolic, imaginary. And with this notion, it accounts for what happens to the human psyche. We have one circle, which is the real. The real is what is outside of myself, over which I have no control. It's the contingent. It's an earthquake happening in the next minute, for instance. The imaginary is what I think about myself, about the world. I'm a nice chap, I'm not a nice chap, etc. And the symbolic is what Lacan calls the treasure chest of signifiers. Speech, for instance, the elements of speech, the vocabulary, the syntax, and so on. Now, you see that if I cut, for instance, the blue circle, the real circle, then the imaginary, my ability to think about myself, about the world, is going to collapse. And so will the symbolic. If the red circle, the imaginary, is cut off, then everything else falls apart as well. And in the case of psychosis, for instance, it is a matter, yes, of the imaginary actually being cut off, and therefore there is no symbolic available to talk about the real. There is this concept. Here is now a RSI of a musical fact, using Lacan notions of Borromean knot. The real, well, that's the desire to make music, the desire to compose. I can talk at length about my desire to be a musician, to be a musicologist, and I will never exhaust that meaning. And that's what is the real. It cannot be completely, totally known. The symbolic, well, the rules of music making as I learned them at Goldsmith College, for instance, how to compose inside the tonal system of the 19th century, or how to compose inside the serial system of Schoenberg. And the imaginary is Oh, I'm doing pop music. Oh, I'm doing pop music. Oh, I'm doing ethnic music. Whatever. But this is a semantic Lacanian construction of the musical fact. Now, I'm going to talk about improvisation, and again, this is another application of my semantic approach. Why improvisation? Well, there is in musicology a very long-standing opposition between what is improvised and what is composed. Improvisus unforeseen, to invent or make something at the time when it is needed without having planned it. It is therefore opposed to a thought-out composition that is an intellectual process. And nowadays, rather, improvisation is confined to the realm of experimental and jazz. In the 19th century, improvisation was learning how to improvise was part and parcel of your education training as a musician. Liszt, Bach, Chopin, Berlioz, Mozart were marvelous improvisers, and then it suddenly disappeared. And then it reappears shortly before the Second World War, but confined to jazz. And then a little bit after that to experimental music. And we have somebody like Luciano Berio, who says that improvisation is the realm of the dilettantes. There is no effort involved in improvisation. I haven't sat holding my head in my hand, trying to compose through something, making an intellectual effort. Yet, let's have a look at a semantic approach to improvisation. Again, as an object, we have the drive or the desire to improvise. And then, as a representamen, what I'm going to use to actually make my improvisation real, we have musical forms, the musical forms which I've learned, so the patterns which I've learned, or the melodic traces which Freud talks about. And the interpretant will be an improvisation. Again, if we go back to Freud, we have this preconscious area where things are quite readily available, even though they're not present to my awareness at all times. They are there, available. And this is a Lacanian RSI model of improv, whereby the real is again the drive, the desire to improvise. The symbolic are those musical forms, which I've learned, those patterns, the melodic traces, and then the imaginary is, well, I'm improvising, I'm an improviser. And in fact, I'm going to show you a 2-minute excerpt of the improvisation I do with a collaborator called Jack Hurst, because we're going to look at an RSI and ORI model of what actually happens in that improvisation situation. And what we do is called free improvisation, whereby we do not decide of anything whatsoever. We do not decide when we start, we do not decide when we finish, we do not decide in the middle, we do not decide of anything, we just play.